Many political commentators frame Nnamdi Kanu as a principled figure who has refused compromise, choosing imprisonment over betraying his cause, and builds emotional support around his loyalty and sacrifice. Some political commentators claim the appeal court is set to expose Justice James Omotosho over 5 major legal errors allegedly used to convict Nnamdi Kanu. Error 1. The court allegedly used a repealed law, the Terrorism Prevention Amendment Act 2013, instead of the valid Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, which critics say invalidates the legal foundation of the conviction. Error 2. The court allegedly delivered judgment despite pending motions and appeals, including jurisdictional challenges and legality objections that were not resolved before judgment. This is portrayed as a violation of due process, with critics arguing that justice cannot be served when unresolved motions exist. Error 3. The court is accused of violating Nnamdi Kanu's fundamental rights, especially the constitutional right to fair hearing under Section 36 of the Nigerian Constitution. Legal analysts and civil groups claim key objections and procedural rights were dismissed instead of properly adjudicated, undermining judicial neutrality. Error 4. The court allegedly dismissed Nnamdi Kanu's written defense address, which the defense argues denied him the opportunity to argue jurisdiction and legality issues fully. Error 5. The court is accused of open bias, with claims the judge aligned with the prosecution's positions and decisions, creating the impression of a predetermined outcome. This update concludes that these alleged errors will not survive at the appeal court, predicting the conviction will be struck out while framing the appeal process as Nnamdi Kanu's path to judicial vindication. The legal storm surrounding Nnamdi Kanu has entered what many observers believe could be its most decisive phase yet, as strong indications emerge that the Court of Appeal is preparing to confront what insiders describe as 5 shocking legal errors allegedly committed by Justice James Omotosho in the judgment that led to Kanu's conviction. For supporters and critics alike, this moment feels less like routine appellate review and more like a potential judicial reckoning. Across political and legal commentary spaces, Nnamdi Kanu is increasingly framed not merely as a defendant, but as a symbol, a man portrayed as choosing imprisonment over compromise, refusing deals that could dilute his cause. This narrative has continued to build emotional momentum around his case, especially as questions about the legal process itself grow louder. At the center of the controversy are allegations that the trial court relied on shaky legal foundations that may not survive appellate scrutiny. The first and perhaps most explosive allegation is that Justice Omotosho allegedly relied on a repealed law, the Terrorism Prevention Amendment Act of 2013, rather than the currently applicable Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act of 2022. Legal analysts argue that if this claim is upheld, it could fundamentally invalidate the conviction, since Nigerian law does not permit convictions under laws no longer in force. In simple terms, critics say you cannot jail a man today using yesterday's law. The second alleged error cuts to the heart of due process. The judge is accused of delivering judgment while critical motions and appeals were still pending, including challenges to the court's jurisdiction and objections to the legality of Kanu's trial. In Nigerian jurisprudence, unresolved jurisdictional issues are not technicalities, they are foundational. Critics argue that proceeding to judgment under such circumstances undermines the integrity of the entire process.
Third is the claim that Nnamdi Kanu's constitutional right to fair hearing, guaranteed under Section 36 of the Nigerian Constitution, was violated. Civil rights groups and legal commentators insist that key objections raised by the defense were brushed aside rather than carefully adjudicated, raising concerns about judicial balance and neutrality. Closely linked to this is the fourth allegation, that the court dismissed Nnamdi Kanu's written defense address, effectively denying him the opportunity to fully argue issues of jurisdiction and legality. In appellate courts, denial of a party's right to be heard, especially in writing, is often treated as a fatal error, not a harmless oversight. The fifth and most sensitive allegation is judicial bias. Critics claim the trial court consistently aligned with the prosecution, creating the impression that the outcome was predetermined. While allegations of bias are always difficult to prove, even the appearance of partiality can be enough to unsettle the conviction at the appellate level. Taken together, many legal watchers believe these alleged errors form a chain too weak to hold. The growing consensus among Kanu's supporters is that the appeal court will strike down the conviction, not as an act of sympathy, but as a correction of process. For them, the appeal is no longer just a legal step. It is being framed as Nnamdi Kanu's path to judicial vindication and a defining test of Nigeria's rule of law. Whether the court agrees remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: the appeal will be watched closely, not just for Kanu, but for what it says about justice in Nigeria itself. Let me walk you through what's happening with Nnamdi Kanu's case right now, because honestly, this might be one of the most important legal moments Nigeria has seen in recent years. If you've been following the news, you know Kanu's name always sparks strong reactions. Some see him as a freedom fighter, others see him as a troublemaker. But whatever side you are on, what's happening in the courtroom right now goes beyond politics. It's about how our legal system works and whether it's working fairly. So here's where we are. The appeal court is reportedly getting ready to examine what legal experts are calling 5 major errors in the trial that led to Nnamdi Kanu's conviction. These aren't small technicalities we're talking about. These are the kind of mistakes that, if proven true, could completely unravel the entire case against him. And that's why everyone from lawyers to activists to ordinary Nigerians is watching this appeal so closely. Let me start by painting the bigger picture for you.
Nnamdi Kanu has been in detention for years now, and throughout this entire ordeal, his supporters have built a particular narrative around him. They describe him as someone who refused to compromise, who chose to stay in prison rather than abandon his beliefs or cut deals that would weaken his cause. Whether you agree with his politics or not, this framing has created powerful emotional support for him. People see him as someone willing to sacrifice his freedom for what he believes in, and that resonates deeply, especially in a country where many feel their own voices don't matter. But now, we're moving beyond the politics and the emotions. We're getting into the nuts and bolts of the law itself, and this is where things get really interesting. The allegations against Justice James Omotosho, the judge who handled Kanu's trial, are serious. They cut to the very foundation of how justice is supposed to work in Nigeria. The first alleged error is probably the most shocking one, and if it's true, it's the kind of mistake that should never happen in any courtroom. The claim is that Justice Omotosho used a law that doesn't even exist anymore to convict Kanu. Specifically, critics say the judge relied on the Terrorism Prevention Amendment Act of 2013, which was replaced by the Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act of 2022. Now, I know legal terminology can make your head spin, but let me break this down in plain terms. Imagine if the government tried to fine you for breaking a traffic rule that was removed from the books 5 years ago. You'd rightly argue that you can't be punished for violating a law that no longer exists. That's essentially what's being alleged here. In Nigerian law, and really in any legal system that respects the rule of law, you cannot convict someone using legislation that has been repealed. It's not just a technical problem, it strikes at the very legitimacy of the conviction itself. Legal analysts have been quite blunt about this. They're saying if the appeal court confirms that a repealed law was indeed used, the conviction cannot stand. It would be like building a house on sand.
No matter how impressive the structure looks, if the foundation is wrong, the whole thing has to come down. And that's what we're potentially looking at here with Kanu's case. The second alleged error deals with something that might sound procedural but is actually fundamental to justice. The accusation is that Justice Omotosho delivered his judgment while important motions and appeals were still pending. These weren't random motions about minor issues. We're talking about challenges to whether the court even had the right to try Kanu in the first place. Questions about the legality of the entire trial process. In Nigerian jurisprudence, jurisdiction is everything. It's not a side issue you can brush aside and deal with later. If a court doesn't have proper jurisdiction, nothing it does matters. It's like a teacher trying to give grades in a subject they're not qualified to teach. The grades don't count no matter how carefully they were calculated. So when critics say that Justice Omotosho proceeded to judgment while jurisdictional challenges were still unresolved, they're essentially saying the judge jumped the gun in a way that compromises everything that followed. Think about it this way. If someone challenges whether a particular court has the authority to try them, that question has to be settled first. You can't just ignore it and move forward with the trial, planning to deal with it later if the person appeals. That's putting the cart before the horse, and in legal terms, it's a serious breach of due process. The third alleged error touches on something every Nigerian should care about, regardless of how they feel about Nnamdi Kanu. It's about the constitutional right to fair hearing, which is guaranteed under Section 36 of our Constitution. This isn't some obscure legal principle buried in complicated statute books. It's a fundamental right that protects all of us. The allegation here is that Kanu's right to fair hearing was violated during his trial. Civil rights groups and legal commentators are saying that important objections raised by his defense team were simply brushed aside rather than being properly considered and addressed. When a judge dismisses legitimate legal arguments without giving them serious consideration, it raises questions about whether the trial was truly fair and balanced. Put yourself in the shoes of anyone facing trial. You hire lawyers, they raise important points about the law, about procedure, about your rights, and the judge essentially waves them away without proper examination. How would that feel? Would you think you got a fair shake? This is what Kanu's supporters are arguing happened, and they are saying it violated his constitutional rights in a way that cannot be overlooked. The fourth alleged error is closely connected to the third one, but it deserves its own attention because of how serious it is. The claim is that the court dismissed Kanu's written defense address. Now, you might wonder why written submissions matter so much when lawyers can argue orally in court. Let me explain. Written defense addresses are crucial because they allow lawyers to carefully lay out complex legal arguments, cite precedents, reference specific laws and constitutional provisions, and build a comprehensive case in a way that's often impossible in the heat of oral argument. When a court dismisses these written submissions, it's essentially denying the defendant a full opportunity to present their case. In Kanu's situation, his lawyers wanted to argue in writing about jurisdiction and legality issues. These are complex matters that benefit from careful, detailed presentation. By allegedly dismissing this written address, critics say Justice Omotosho denied Kanu the chance to fully argue why the court shouldn't have jurisdiction over him or why the legal basis of the trial was flawed. In appellate courts, this kind of denial is often seen not as a minor procedural hiccup, but as a fundamental error that undermines the entire trial. The fifth alleged error is perhaps the most sensitive and the hardest to prove, but it's also the one that has generated the most controversy. This is the allegation of judicial bias. Critics are claiming that throughout the trial, Justice Omotosho consistently sided with the prosecution, creating an impression that the outcome was decided before the trial even concluded. Bias allegations are always tricky in legal cases. You can't just point to a few unfavorable rulings and cry bias. Judges are supposed to apply the law, and sometimes the law favors the prosecution, sometimes it favors the defense. But what critics are alleging here goes beyond normal judicial decision-making. They are suggesting a pattern of alignment with the prosecution that was so consistent and so obvious that it created the appearance of partiality. In our legal system, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. Even if a judge is internally neutral, but their conduct creates a reasonable perception of bias, that alone can be enough to taint a conviction. This is because public confidence in the judicial system depends on people believing that trials are fair, that both sides get equal treatment, that the judge is an impartial referee rather than a participant favoring one team. When you put all 5 of these alleged errors together, you start to see why so many legal observers believe the conviction might not survive the appeal. It's not just one problem, it's multiple interconnected issues, each serious enough on its own, but collectively forming what critics describe as a chain too weak to hold. The appeal court now faces a crucial decision. They have to examine each of these allegations carefully and decide whether they are valid. If even one of them is upheld, particularly the first one about using a repealed law, the conviction could be overturned. If multiple errors are confirmed, the case against Kanu could collapse entirely. For Kanu's supporters, this appeal represents more than just another legal proceeding. They see it as his path to vindication, a chance for the judicial system to correct what they view as a fundamentally flawed trial. They are framing it as a test of whether Nigeria's courts will uphold the rule of law even in politically charged cases, even when the defendant is controversial, even when powerful interests might prefer a different outcome. But this case matters beyond Kanu himself. It's about setting precedents for how trials are conducted in Nigeria. If courts can use repealed laws, ignore pending jurisdictional challenges, dismiss defense submissions, and proceed with trials that appear biased, then none of us are truly protected by the law.
The rights that protect Nnamdi Kanu today are the same rights that protect you and me tomorrow. When those rights are violated, regardless of who the defendant is, it weakens the protection available to everyone. The growing consensus among many who've been following this case closely is that the appeal court will likely strike down the conviction, not because of sympathy for Kanu or his cause, not because of political pressure, but simply as a correction of legal process. If the allegations are proven true, the law requires the conviction to be overturned. That's how the system is supposed to work. Of course, we have to wait and see what the appeal court actually decides. Courts don't always rule the way observers expect, and there may be aspects of the case that the public doesn't fully understand. But what's clear already is that this appeal will be watched incredibly closely, not just by Kanu's supporters or his critics, but by anyone who cares about justice in Nigeria. This case has become a mirror reflecting our judicial system back at us. It's forcing us to ask hard questions. Do our courts follow proper procedure? Do defendants get genuine fair hearings? Are judges truly impartial? Can our legal system handle politically sensitive cases without compromising fundamental rights and proper process? These aren't abstract questions for law professors to debate in ivory towers. They affect real people's lives. They affect whether Nigerians can trust that if they ever face trial, they'll be treated fairly according to established law, not according to who they are or what they believe or how powerful their opponents might be. Whatever happens with Nnamdi Kanu's appeal, the issues it raises will outlast this particular case. They go to the heart of what kind of country Nigeria wants to be. A country where the law is applied consistently and fairly, where rights matter regardless of politics, where courts are respected because they earn that respect through impartial administration of justice, or a country where legal proceedings can be shaped by considerations beyond the law itself. The appeal court's decision, when it comes, will tell us a lot about which direction we're heading, and that's why everyone is watching so carefully.
This isn't just about one man anymore. It's about all of us and the legal system we depend on to protect our rights and deliver justice. As we await the appeal court's decision, one question looms larger than the legal technicalities themselves. How did Justice James Omotosho allow this to happen? If even half of these allegations are proven true, we're not looking at minor oversights or debatable interpretations of law. We're looking at a systematic failure of judicial responsibility that should concern every Nigerian who believes in the rule of law. Let's be brutally honest here. A judge who allegedly convicts someone using a repealed law isn't making a small mistake. This isn't about misremembering a case citation or getting a date wrong. This is fundamental legal incompetence, the kind that suggests either a shocking lack of preparation or something far more troubling, a predetermined outcome that required bending the law to fit. Any first-year law student knows you cannot apply legislation that no longer exists. So how does a sitting High Court judge allegedly make this error in such a high-profile, politically sensitive case? The answer, I'm afraid, points to something deeply wrong with how this trial was conducted. Justice Omotosho had every resource at his disposal. He had time, he had legal staff, he had the full weight of the judicial system behind him. Yet, according to these allegations, he either didn't know or didn't care that he was using the wrong law. Neither explanation is acceptable. Neither explanation inspires confidence in the integrity of the proceedings over which he presided. But it gets worse. The allegation that he proceeded to judgment while jurisdictional challenges remained unresolved is not just procedurally questionable, it suggests an unseemly rush to conviction. Why the hurry? Jurisdictional issues are foundational questions that must be settled before anything else can properly proceed. Every judge knows this. It's taught in law school, it's reinforced throughout legal practice, and it's repeated in countless appellate decisions. For Justice Omotosho to allegedly ignore pending jurisdictional motions and race to judgment suggests he was more interested in reaching a particular outcome than in ensuring the process was legally sound. The allegations of dismissing Kanu's written defense address and violating his right to fair hearing paint an even more disturbing picture. These aren't administrative errors, these are denials of fundamental rights. When a judge prevents a defendant from fully presenting their case, when legitimate legal arguments are brushed aside without proper consideration, when one party consistently receives favorable treatment while the other faces obstacles at every turn, we're no longer talking about an impartial arbiter of justice. We're talking about someone who appears to have chosen sides. And this brings us to the most damning allegation: judicial bias. The perception that Justice Omotosho aligned himself with the prosecution throughout the trial is not something that can be easily dismissed.
In a case as politically charged as Nnamdi Kanu's trial, the judge had a special obligation to demonstrate scrupulous fairness, to lean over backwards to ensure both sides received equal treatment, to make absolutely certain that justice was not only done but manifestly seen to be done. Instead, according to these allegations, Justice Omotosho did the opposite. He created an appearance of partiality so obvious that even casual observers noticed it. He allowed his courtroom to become a theater where the outcome seemed scripted rather than a solemn chamber where law and evidence would determine the result. If the appeal court confirms these errors, Justice Omotosho's legacy will not be as a judge who upheld the law in a difficult case. It will be as a judge who failed spectacularly in his duty, who compromised the integrity of Nigeria's judicial system for reasons we can only speculate about, and who reminded us all why judicial independence and impartiality matter so desperately. That's a legacy no judge should want, and one that Nigeria's legal system cannot afford to tolerate.